червона калина похилилася, чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину піднімемо, а ми нашу славну Україну, гей, гей, розвеселимо. Ой, у лузі червона калина похилилася, чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину піднімемо, а ми нашу славну Україну, гей, гей, розвеселимо. Ой, у лузі червона калина похилилася, чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину піднімемо, а ми нашу славну Україну, гей, гей, розвеселимо.
Jag heter Oleksandr Kyselov, jag jobbar på Uppsala universitet som forskningsassistent på statsvetenskapliga institutionen. Och jag var en aktivist i Ukraina, jag var medlem av Sociala Rörelsen. Jag var medlem av Sociala Rörelsen i Ukraina och så var medlem av studentförening Premadea, direktaktion. Och jag kan prata om vad händer i Ukraina nu, så mer av praktisk erfarenhet än akademisk. Och då andra panelister kan komplementera det. Men jag ska prata på engelska, det är lättare för mig att beskriva vad jag vill säga.
Ja.
Yeah. So I will be talking about the meaning of the workers' movement for resistance. And one of the things that I want to underline, that the very fact that the war is happening is already a great failure of the workers' movement. This is a failure of the workers' movement in Ukraine, which failed to actually get their issues on the agenda and allowed neoliberal politicians or nationalist politicians to steer the events. And now what we see, how Ukraine is weakened in many ways, this is a direct consequences of this. And it is a direct failure of the workers' movement in Russia, which not only allowed the war to happen, in which many of the Russian people died, but also failed to even advocate for the social standards in the country, because so many of those Russians who come to Ukraine to fight or kill, they come there because of the money, because there is no other way for them to earn for decent living in the country. And even their death on the front line brings more to their families that they can make in whole their life. So this is a great failure. But what we can look at what's happening now, I have two big things that I keep repeating probably all the time, but that in this new environment, looking at what is happening in our countries, it is important to make at least two conclusions. That in this new environment, given the changes, political opportunities for the working class, for the workers, are different now. They are more needed, as we see in Ukraine. You cannot just neglect people. If war or crisis comes, you need everyone. And then the role of the workers' movement in Ukraine or in other countries would be to utilize these opportunities, to use them and to try to make sure to influence the course of events when there is a direct need for them. To use this power, not to just stay somewhere in the other reality, and also to understand that today preparedness skills, they are a basic right for people. There could be sabotage attacks, there could be war, there could be climate catastrophes, and in this situation, not to have very basic skills. Maybe you come from older generation, which probably did military service. I didn't do this in my time because it wasn't seen necessary. So what I feel that we have this right to be prepared. We have to know how to act, how to coordinate, and that's what is important to understand when we are talking about, reintroduction of military service or what is happening in other countries in Europe, what is on the agenda now. It's not about militarism or anything, it's the same thing as, for me, as compulsory education. This is the right to have skills. And then you decide how you use this power if you're organized. But talking about Ukraine, we can look at what is going on. There is a background probably to the labor movement in Ukraine. Our country was quite centrally steered in the Soviet time, with a lot of alienation, with a lot of bureaucracy, and the labor movement in itself was quite discredited, at least the formal one. And it is split in Ukraine as it is right now. One is more of the Soviet tradition, the Federation of the Trade Unions of Ukraine, which in some branches they might be quite actively organized. In others, they have more of a social department functions and they cooperate with the administration. Maybe they distribute some benefits to their members, but they are not an active school of fighting for people's rights. Just a huge bureaucratic organization. They have problems also because they have a lot of properties that they inherited from the Soviet time when the unions were part of this big system. And it also creates some kind of political tensions because many people want to benefit from this property. And that's like now the government is trying to seize their office. But another one is a Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine, which is started by the miners on the wave of miners' strike who didn't find the official federation helpful. It is smaller, it is poorer, but it exists, and in some fields you can see it as an example. None of them have much of the political influence. The federation officially, they always change the number. It could be from 1 million to 4 million. Sometimes they say it even got smaller because of the war. So probably they don't really know how many members they have. And probably it means that they're not very mobilized internally for some action. Before they were associated with the ruling party, the Party of Regions, at least some of their leaders, they were MPs for the ruling party. Now they have none of those, but one of the MPs agreed to become the representative in the parliament, so at least they can voice their concerns. One of the better parts of that union is the construction workers union, in which our activists, they worked as organizers, starting from the Union of the Crane Workers, and they tried to push this organizing methods that are used by worldwide. And I think here they are promoted by Zetkin Foundation, the left party, tried to use them for the unions. That's how there were contacts established with the leadership of the Construction Workers Union, and their leader is now a deputy president of this federation. And yes, so that's about the federation. Another one, KVP, they also have one member of parliament, but they do it through sort of an agreement with one of the opposition party, more of a social conservative party, Batkivshchina. And well, on some level it gives them, again, voice in the parliament, but also it prevents for them supporting any other candidates, because that would be against the agreement they have with the party. They can only support this party. Majority of the workers in Ukraine are not organized, so the unions, even when they exist, it's mostly in the public sector. The biggest one would be probably the teachers union, the medical workers union, but like even social workers, but they usually are not strong. They are top managed. That's why one of the most inspiring things that happened in the latest years was the creation of independent union of medical workers. The original name be like Nina, now they changed it to be like We Are. They managed to reach out to nurses, who are probably one of the most vulnerable part of the profession. In all parts of the country, they're having a conference, I think, right now. But I talked to them, they said that they reached out to almost 1,000 people. Of course, not all of them are active, but at least this is some network that they managed to create and exchange information within. That's about the workers' movement overall. And one of the biggest labor fights was actually attempts to change the labor code of the country, because Ukrainian labor code is practically still a Soviet one with some amendments. And there was an idea at some point in time, which was even promoted by the Federation of Trade Unions, that we need to make a completely new labor code, which was very liked by the neoliberal reformers in the government. So the fight against these changes and for at least maintaining the Soviet labor right protections, which on paper at least were very good, that was one of the central fights for the workers' movement. Right now, many things changed in the country, obviously, and one of the biggest challenges for workers' movement is that they are losing members, because they usually work on big enterprises, and if it's a male-dominated union, then the male workers, they would go to the front line, they will be mobilized, or maybe they volunteer. So you lose your activists, you lose your membership, because they are in the army and they are not so much in touch. Was one of the union leaders in Socialny Ruch we cooperate with, he said he lost all union club leaders. So they had to start this organizing infrastructure from the scratch, which on the other hand also gave opportunity for females, because that's the main labor force, and all union club leaders are women now. But also means that they have to learn many things. Another big part of what unions are doing is supporting those of them who are in the army, because up until now, the state is not really capable to provide people in the army with everything. Although now, of course, it is better than it was in 2014 and better than it was in 2022. But still, a lot of things, when someone is mobilized, they become responsibility of their support network, of their friends, of their relatives, or of the organization they're members of, like trade unions. And of course, if breadwinner, let's say, mobilized, unions, they would have to support the family of this person, because they are just left on their own. And sometimes people who are in the army, they might get killed, or they can become disabled in a way. So this is also part of what unions become responsible for. And I'm minding also that because of these contractions and membership and changes, they get even less membership fees, and they don't have any state support for this. So the opportunities are becoming less, but the needs are becoming more. And that basically becomes a priority for them. One of the ways how they try to overcome it is, of course, because they are part of the international community of trade unions, and they are trying to reach out to other countries. Not always other trade unions are interested in this formal cooperation, but at least beyond some formal support. But in other instances it works, and there are networks even of grassroots activists from different countries. They try to bring everyone together, but also try to use it probably as a political leverage, because currently Ukraine doesn't have enough money even for defense, because according to latest data, even in this year, the state budget is less than we spend on the military needs. And it's not the only need that exists in Ukraine. So we are very much dependent on the aid that comes from abroad. And that's financial, that's military, but that's also an equipment, because one of the targets of the Russian attack is energetical system of Ukraine, which affects life of everyone. And this is also actually what I just start thinking it makes life more difficult, because when you don't have electricity, when you don't have water, some simple everyday tasks, they take longer time. Or sometimes you can't do anything because maybe there is an air raid, so people have to hide from it. It takes so much more of your time, so you don't really have time to contribute to something else. And that's the fact of living in these conditions for years, or having your family members who died or who could die every moment. That takes a huge psychological toll on people. But of course, there's still labor fights going on. But since there is no political process is quite limited in the country, it's hard to influence because you can't do protests. I mean, sometimes people do, but it's easier for some spontaneous organization than for a formal one. You can't do strikes, which is the main tool of the workers' movement. This would be illegal on the one hand, but on the other hand, it would hurt not only the employer, but it will hurt sort of a country as well, especially if it's on a larger scale. And when the country is under attack, that also might be perceived wrongly. But one of the biggest things, I think, for a lot of workers, not everyone is focusing on that because it requires quite often legal battles, which are more costly, is that not all critical infrastructure workers, that they receive bonuses for working in these territories that might be affected by the war. Also, like now, all country can be actually affected by the war, but there are some bureaucratical processes, and some workers, they receive these bonuses, others not. So that's perceived as unjust. That's what we are trying to raise, including through international channels. But also coming to people who work for defense industry or for like energy, because again, due to some bureaucratical moments, if they are wounded or if they are killed in service, they might not get a compensation because, again, some documents are missing somewhere there, and they don't do proper jobs of making people like registered everywhere. And the same thing could happen also, like people who work in some industry, they may have a right to deferment, the right not to be called for the military service because they need it in their workplace. Again, there are some mistakes happening with it, and that might be problematic, but it can also be used as a tool if you are a worker who is inconvenient, because they will just cross you out of this deferment list and you'll become not their problem. You will become a soldier, you will go off, making it more difficult to organize. Socialny Ruch, the Sociala Rörelsen organization I'm a part of, with the cooperation with the Danish Democracy Fund, there are some kind of legal aid receptions and cooperation with trade unions to channel at least some funds on these legal battles. But looking at why it is after all important also, because majority of Ukrainians, they are workers. Maybe not the majority of Ukrainians that are in the media or on the TV, but the majority are. They just the teachers who take care of children right now. Sometimes they have to teach in the bomb shelters. Sometimes they have to do it online, which is making it difficult for both parties. They are nurses who are still, they're getting paid maybe $300-400, which is nothing given the amount of work that they do and given the situation in which they found themselves. Ukrainian army also basically consists of workers. Some of them are formal workers because now they're soldiers on the front line, but the army, which is almost 1 million people, it's not all of them are on the battlefield. Large part of them, they are still doing some daily work in logistics and other things that are necessary in the army. So they're basically just workers in the uniform, and they have even less rights sometimes. Because also, like if you live in a small town, in a big city, as a soldier, like they transfer you to the capital, you have to pay rent, for example. But unlike soldiers on the front line, people don't receive extra payments for this. So for depending on what was your job before, getting called to the military, you might have a loss of income, but also significantly worsened conditions if you're transferred to the city, which is not your own city, you have no housing yet. And all the people, those who are mobilized, the easiest way to mobilize is not to go to the capital city, but the easiest because people may not report where they work, people may not report where they live, or maybe that's like doesn't coincide. But the workers, they usually work in the factory. So it was like one of the first target where you would do mobilization. They would come to the factory, there are 4,000 workers, they all come at the same time, they go through the same entrance to the factory, so it is easier to reach out and mobilize. And the majority of Ukrainian army might not be those 2-3 media famous brigades. They're just ordinary brigades with their ordinary problems. These are workers, and some of them are exhausted. You can see the problem with when the government is not paying enough attention to the workers because people are leaving. They can't take it anymore. They complain on being not really prepared for this. They complain on that there were not enough rotations because they're always stuck on the front line or somewhere else. They complain that their commanders can be corrupt, and as we learned recently, sometimes it's not only direct commanders. We have corruption in the energy sector and with the closest president associates. And there are rumors that the similar situation might be in the military sector, in the sector of defense. So a lot of people are tired, yet they have less options to raise these things directly because of the situation. So sometimes the only way for them is to leave, which is at least somehow presses the government in a way, because they have to introduce rotations. It's more difficult with rotation, but like the mandatory vacation that they have to take as soldiers, 2 weeks, which most of them are able to do now, unless things become even worse, because last year was very special. But because people don't feel obliged to respond to the call, which is not sincere, government is reconsidering the approach, and they are offering now contracts, or like trying to introduce contracts for people who go to the army, which with decent condition in also for a limited term. And it's not people who just, you go there and you stay there forever. You have some certain rights, and this is happening also because of these dynamics. People are needed, yet they're not organized, and it's hard to press this, as I said. But one of the things that probably is possible to do is to raise it again internationally, because Ukraine is trying to become a member of the European Union. Ukraine is reaching to Swedish government, which is also one of the main sponsors of Ukraine, which is to other governments. And in these governments, you have workers' movements, you have political parties which can raise this concern. Like we were talking with the chairperson of the Social Affairs Committee in the European Parliament, who is the former leader of the Left Party of Finland. And this situation with the workers, for example, on their factories or like their workplaces, not on the factories, is concerning. That it is somehow possible to bring up, but like often European Parliament is not the most direct arena which you should access to. So that's then, of course, involvement everywhere else is important. And what I have noticed in many European countries, that those who might actually or should be and usually are on the side of workers, they quite often are not so much interested, because it's the support in Ukraine is not something cool in a way, because everyone supports Ukraine, and at least in some countries, the government supports Ukraine. So there is no need to pay your efforts. Also, it's like, who will you oppose? Because sometimes the guiding idea of the left is resistance, but the government supports Ukraine. There is nothing to resist here, and the left might choose to focus on something else, no less important, but not on Ukraine. And that's a bit problematic, because peoples in the governments of European countries, even if they say they support Ukraine, well, quite often their own countries are not even prepared to support Ukraine because of the policies that those governments implemented. European countries, most of them, they completely depend on the United States when it comes to defense. And the policies that they implemented, the government, they are alienating a lot of population which chooses to vote for some right-wing populists for whom Ukraine doesn't matter. It's just like something that this government is wasting money on. While local people, they just don't do anything. So giving all this right to talk about Ukraine to some leaders is the wrong thing, because they won't do it in their best intentions, or they will not be capable to deliver. And that's why it's good probably to have this meeting and talk to you as Swedish citizens, as political or union activists, maybe in your other organization where you're active. But that's probably a little bit of overall. I don't know what you're interested in, so I'm of course ready to complement and answer your questions.
Ursäkta mig. Det finns stolar här. Om det är någon som hör dåligt eller sådär, så kan man sätta sig närmare här, så om det.
Jag tänkte frågor. Vill du ha dem på svenska? Funkar det på svenska? Eller
jag kan förstå svenska. Det är lättare för mig att
prata på engelska.
Ja, jag kan svara på engelska, men du kan fråga på svenska också.
Jag tänkte, du berörde ju frågan om korruption. Och jag tänker just det här med, vi såg i somras hur den ukrainska befolkningen mobiliserade mot när Zelensky fick parlamentet att besluta om att man skulle liksom ta kontrollen över korruptionsundersökningen och inte ha någon oberoende. Hur man mobiliserade mot det, och jag tänker så här, överhuvudtaget när det sker missförhållande i Ukraina, så tycker jag mig se, jag vet inte om det stämmer, om du har information om det, just att hur folk involveras i att protestera och mot sådana här att man använder resurserna felaktigt och sådana saker. Finns det någon rörelse mot att, eller i riktning mot att man kanske börjar ta kontroll, alltså det här vi pratar om arbetarkontroll just över olika saker, att kontrollera de man inte litar på i stat och företag, att befolkningen och arbetarrörelsen på något vis tänker i de banorna att vi måste kontrollera, vi kan inte lita på dem liksom. Finns det några sådana tecken?
Not at the moment, but that's the idea that we are trying to advocate, because Ukrainian war is in some ways is a very strange war, seeing so blatant corruption on many levels, when tomorrow even those people, they can suffer. It's outrageous for many, but it's also makes people disillusioned in many things. And our economy is not mobilized. It's not like the war economies that existed back in the days. It's not. There are a lot of enterprises, they work according to the market laws, they pay taxes, and many of them, they don't pay taxes, because one of the ways how you evade taxes, you register small business and pretend you're a small business, or maybe your enterprise is a set of small businesses, so you pay less taxes. And government is not intervening in this. Government is not trying to coordinate everything. Many things, they are driven by kind of competition in a way, which may help with probably innovation sometimes, because people all try to compete, but doesn't help with scaling things up. And we see how Russia is more capable right now. They say, they always, not all, but like quite often, even in the media, they say that Ukrainians, they come up with some things, and then the Russians, they just scale them up, copy and scale them up. And this is the problem of Ukraine, not being able to really mobilize its economy, and that's something government is avoiding to address. Even the ministers, they are not big friends of the trade unions. The current prime minister, she was a minister in charge of economy, and when she was talking about this in Berlin, there was a side event organized by German Social Democrats. All of these people coming from different parts of Europe, they were surprised how disregardful of the workers she was, because for them it was always about protecting investors, protecting something else, making it flexible, making it innovative, all these kind of words, and this corporate bingo, which makes it problematic in many ways. They don't even try to reach out to people. And sometimes, given the situation, it's also not that even if they wanted it, they could. We have an example with the mineral deal, for example, and well, it's terrible one, how it was presented, especially at that moment, because people are dying so that someone in America can make money of this. Because they're fighting for their land, but they won't be able to get the fruits of it. But also, given that Ukraine is dependent on America, given that Europe is dependent on America, you sometimes have no choice even. Because you just have to accept the situation, that's because no one cared about this. And one of the ways how we think that corruption can be managed is by putting people on boards or like rearranging it completely, so people who work on the enterprise, they know how to manage it better, and they're interested in this enterprise or their workplace to continue, to go on in the best way. But it's not on the agenda of the government right now, unfortunately. And as I described, sometimes trade unions, they are not in the best position to actively advocate for this. And even with the anti-corruption protests, that was a victory, but a victory in a very superficial way, because it was young people or NGO activists who went on the streets. In normal time, they're not so many, they're not even important. If the same students go on streets in Moscow, nobody would listen to them, at best. Maybe they will just go direct to prison. But because of this Ukrainian dependency on the Europe, that was a symbolic action. And then all this European government, I think there was one of the support tranches was blocked. Zelensky government, they had to react. Because people in Ukraine, they pointed out on the problem, and donors of Ukraine, they applied pressure. This is sometimes the only way you can achieve change in Ukraine. At least while there is war in the country, because that's the main concern of people is survival at the moment.